What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with another 2023-2024 NBA look ahead. We are on to the Toronto Raptors, and that means I have to, and I'm excited to speak with Aman Adden of Yahoo Sports Canada. Does a fantastic job covering the Toronto Raptors and talking about the entire league at large. The question we have to begin with, Aman, how the heck are you doing?
Good. Thank you. How are you?
I am mortified at probably some of the takes I delivered with you about the Raptors on this podcast last year. I was
That was a
going through it
fever
and I was
dream.
like, oh,
That was a fever dream. Vibes are high. Also, I would be remiss if I did not plug Pros and Claws, which is a new Substack that I have coming out with Usid. So please check that out as well. You'll find lots of our writings there. A lot more of my NBA at large stuff will be at Substack of Pros and Claws. Pros and Claws.
pros and
Pros,
what is it?
pros like pros,
Okay,
and then claws, because we're so punny, like a raptor claw, like a
dope.
claw.
I'll put the link to that in the podcast and YouTube descriptions then so people can go subscribe to that. Is it up and why have I not seen that? I feel
It
like I
is. It's
should
up
be
and
on top.
running. I had the last thing I did was a Damian Lillard piece because the NBA decided to go really quiet outside of KPJ stuff, which I did not want to write about because it's just anger on a page. So more stuff will come out. I have a CP3 Golden State Warriors thing that I'm working on right now.
Ooh, that's not going to be divisive at all.
Because I
Not
really like it. I'm really so on board. So Warriors fans, I'm sorry, but yeah.
Yeah, my co-host is a Warriors fan, and he's on board with the move. And so I'm pretty sure he's been excommunicated from like the Warriors fan base. I'm fairly certain.
I love it. Like, imagine if you don't need to have just Draymond run pick and roll a ton when he just can't shoot anymore and teams just don't trust him. Imagine if you had the best pick and roll guard in basketball there as well. So Steph doesn't just need to be a screener. Draymond can set the screens. I'm sorry. I'm ruining my piece. We're here to talk Raptors. We're not here to talk Golden State Warriors. But yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk Toronto Raptors. I wanted to start with last season
Oh,
and the disappointment. It was clearly a confluence of stuff when you look at we've heard the reports about what was going on with Nick Nurse behind the scenes. You had topsy-turvy shooting from FEV, regression from GTJ. I think they also probably were hoping for bigger leaps from Scottie Barnes and Precious Achiuwa, who, speaking of being mortified, I told you I picked him for my most improved player on this podcast last year. That selection did not pan out so well. Was there like a bigger factor more than anything else that contributed to last season? Was it just roster construction? Like, what stood out the most to you about that year's team?
Yeah, it was a lot of things. I mean, I try to talk Warriors already, and I try to really make this pod about Canada basketball, anything to talk about that Raptors team last year. Their defense was atrocious, which is something that, when we got on this pod here last year, we were like, hey, they're going to be good defensively. In the second half of that 2021 season, they finished top 3 in the second half of that season defensively. You would expect that a team that has a bunch of 6'9" guys with 7 feet long wingspan would be a good defensive team. And that's just not what we saw at all last year. And that has to do with some of the behind the scenes stuff with Nick Nurse, I'm sure. That has to do with some of the regression that guys took. So it is just sort of all of those things compounding into one main issue. But when you look at that Raptors team, I think the lack of defense really speaks to that team's identity. It was very clear that they were checked out. You have Nick Nurse having a press conference in Philadelphia, which just happens to be the team that he now coaches, basically being like, yeah, 10 years is a long time with the team. Yeah, maybe looking back at this and it felt like an end of season presser in the middle of a season when your team is fighting for a playoff spot, and it just so happens to be the city that you now coach at. It's a lot of coincidences, but so I think you just had a lot of guys really check out. And defense would be their primary issue. Fred VanVleet shooting going down, yes. I think not taking that leap from Scottie Barnes and Precious Achiuwa, sure, that's big, but I think even when we talked about it last year, we were like, they're kind of superfluous a little bit. Like, if they take that leap, That's the cherry on top. But the bones of this team is already so good with Fred VanVleet coming off of an all-star season, Pascal Siakam coming off of an all-NBA season. We know what OG Anunoby was, and he is not anyone who disappointed last year. He's not the guy that you look at. So you're looking at the bones of this team, and you're like, that's a good team. You add in Scottie, you add in Precious, and as long as they don't regress, everything should be fine. But not only did they not take that next step, I'm not sure that they had better seasons, and they definitely did not have better seasons than they had the season prior, and I think that matters. But it doesn't fall on them. It falls on the entire team. Defensively, everybody was checked out, and part of that is roster construction. It took so long for the Raptors to finally get a rim protector, but I think part of that is because they proved the year before that they can do it without one, but none of them had the buy-in that they had the season prior, and everything just started to crumble, and it was all bad. It was a bad year.
You had mentioned the defense, and so they hired Darko Rajokovic, and he's talked a lot, I think, about protecting the rim and contesting threes or limiting threes. Do you expect them under him to change the principles of their defense, which over the past few years has just been super aggressive? Like, let's force turnovers. That's going to drive our offense in transition. Do you expect to see any changes there? Maybe a more conservative approach from them under him?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that Nick Nurse kind of gets a lot of the blame for the way that the Raptors played defense because it was this ultra aggressive style. But he also had a team that didn't have a center and had a bunch of 6'9" guys with 7 feet wingspan. So the way to take away the rim is to have a bunch of guys. You're giving up those corner threes because you expect guys to be able to rotate back and then rotate back to the rim because they're so long. They're able to beat their man at any given time, but that takes so much out of guys. And I think that was undercalculated by the team. But now that they have Jakob, who is a great rim protector, we saw what the numbers looked like when Jakob came into the fray. The defense skyrocketed. It was so much better. And the defense also looked good with Christian Koloko at the 5. They just needed a center. They needed to have that guy. So now that Darko has that, I do think they'll play a more conservative style of defense. And I think a lot of people are going to credit him for that and kind of knock Nick Nurse because they did not do that. Hardwood knock Nick Nurse because they didn't do that. But I don't think that's completely fair just because Nick Nurse had a roster that did not have that guy. And Darko will.
And to your point, they were 6th. And I was someone who kind of criticized the Jakob trade, but they were 6th in points allowed per possession after the trade deadline. So we'll see if that sticks. The other thing, to Nick Nurse's credit, I know people make fun of the minutes he played his key players, but like when you don't really have a trustworthy bench, I don't know what else you're supposed to do, and I don't know how much better that team gets. And I'm also wondering, with the style he wanted to play defensively, if you don't have the depth of talent to like kind of spread those minutes about, if it just gets harder to sustain over not just a season, but multiple seasons.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we saw. No, I was going to say that's exactly what we saw.
Fred VanVleet, I didn't start with him, probably should have. I was actually surprised, at least per Raptors fans in our YouTube comments, who were pretty aggressive by saying there were some that said Fred VanVleet was going to be addition by subtraction, like type of stuff. Where did you sort of land on that? Were you surprised it played out the way it did? Is he actually this huge loss as people, these people that are 30,000 feet away like myself think he's a monster loss? Where did you just sort of land on how that entire situation played out?
Yeah, I'm definitely in the minority of Raptor fans in that I think it is a huge loss. I think this is the biggest blunder of the Raptors front office tenure. A lot of people talk about their lack of asset management in, that they've lost pretty much everyone from the championship roster for nothing back in return, except for Pascal Siakam. OG, of course, but he wasn't playing in the playoffs at the very least. And I don't fault them for that. Like Kyle Lowry, you do a favor for the greatest Raptor of all time. He did not want to be traded midseason. He wanted to go to Miami, and you're doing the greatest player in your franchise history who just helped you win a championship a favor. You do that. Kawhi didn't want to be here, always wanted to be in LA. You win a championship, you let him go. You knew that was a risk, and that is one you do 10 times out of 10. Marc Gasol, Serge Ibaka, those were not guys that you were giving their next contract to. It would not have made sense. They did not offer them anything because they did not want them back. And so Fred VanVleet is the one guy who they wanted back. I mean, everyone's been talking about what direction are the Raptors going in? Who knows what they want to do? And they've told us time and time again exactly what they want to do, which is run it back. They thought last season didn't work for a number of reasons, coaching being one of them, defense being another because you didn't have a rim protector. They looked at last season and thought, okay, well, if we fix these issues, which we have, they should be a much better team next season. That's what they continuously told us, except the decision wasn't theirs to make. Fred VanVleet was a free agent, and Houston gave him the bag. Not something that you could have foresaw going into the offseason. Certainly, like them getting Ime Udoka, not giving Harden the money that we all thought that they would, and instead giving it to Dillon Brooks and Fred VanVleet, but that's where you're left with. And so to me, it was the biggest blunder of the front office, and it's a huge loss for the Raptors. The idea that it could be addition by subtraction for a team that has no shooting. No matter what you do, you want to build a team around either Scottie Barnes, Pascal Siakam, or both of them. The one thing that either one of them will need, or both of them will need, is shooting. And Fred VanVleet was your best shooter, even though he had a bad shooting year last year. His career tells us that he's the best shooter. And even though those shots weren't going in, he's the only one being guarded out there with relative consistency, right? Which is a lot of what floor spacing is. He's also the team's only pull-up three-point shooter, which is going to be a huge issue on this team this season, that the fact that they have no pull-up shooter. And I know that, the reason why people say it's addition by subtraction is everyone wants the ball in Scottie Barnes' hands and wants Scottie Barnes to have more, point guard reps. But hey, even if you do that, guess what he needs next to him? A catch and shoot guy. And guess who your best catch and shoot guy was by the numbers every single year? Fred VanVleet. So there's no scenario where, in my opinion, where it is addition by subtraction. He was also a great leader. But people just want the usage to be spread out more, and I get that. But to me, I don't know that Fred VanVleet had the ball in his hands because he's the selfish player who doesn't know how to play off ball. He played off ball. He played alongside Kyle Lowry. He's been doing this his entire career, right? Like, he knows how to do that. It's that they didn't have a better option. And I think that that's something that people have not yet come around to because they don't want to believe it to be true, but the numbers bear it out. There was no better option than Fred VanVleet on ball. And so that's what the Raptors had to do. You look at it post Jakob trade, the best sort of offense that you got was the pick and roll between Jakob and Fred. It's finally has this pick and roll big, but now you don't have a pick and roll guard because nobody is a pull-up shooter on the team. So there's no balance here. Losing Fred VanVleet is an entire blunder. They have not made it up. We talked about FIBA a lot. Shout out to Dennis Schroder for winning FIBA MVP, but he's also not a pull-up threat. And I think that's going to really, really matter this season. So in my opinion, there is no scenario, there's no world where losing Fred VanVleet is addition by subtraction. Even if you want Scottie Barnes to take that next step and be your point guard, you still need shooting around him. You still need a secondary ball handler at best. And I don't know that you can have all of your ball handlers on the team, whether it's Pascal, Scottie, or Dennis Schroder, not be pull-up threats and that be a recipe for success. That's just what team has had that happen and it be successful? I can't think of one.
Right. I was actually surprised with a lot of the criticism that we got when we were talking about this over the offseason was that we don't watch Raptors games. Obviously, that's criticism number one, because he was a ball hog and he was selfish. And it was just like, you look at the options they had and just like they were in the 8th percentile of half court efficiency when Pascal, OG, and Scottie played without VanVleet. Like, that's like their half court offense was bad and it got a lot worse without VanVleet. And so I thought maybe the number took some people back, and there were people that talked about the luxury tax. And I'm like, look, it was a 2-year max. It's a 3-year deal, but it was a 2-year max. You can get out of it and figure out the rest later. Like, you pay this man. And if you need to cut salary elsewhere, like, you just you figure it out later. That's where I'm at.
The number scared me. I'm not going to lie. The number scared me. And for that number, if you're not going to pay him that, sure. But also, the Raptors walked into last offseason with 3 guys who were unrestricted free agents. And I'm sorry, tampering rules and all of that, but if you're not having conversations with your guys, if you're not gauging where they are and whether or not they want to come, I think you sort of make deals and you make moves, but they didn't want to do that because they wanted to see what this team would look like together. I personally think there's the ball hogs and there's a lot of conversation about look at the shots that he took. And it's like, you need a pull-up shooter. You need a guy who can space the floor. Even if it doesn't go in, even if you think it's a bad shot, you need to keep defenses honest. And right now, the Raptors don't have a guy that can reliably do that. And we've seen that it's not going to work. And Fred VanVleet had a bad season last year shooting. That was his worst season shooting. And he took a step back defensively as well. That was not, that's not all-star Fred VanVleet. And I think if you were paying Fred VanVleet long-term, or for the next 2-3 years, let's say, your idea is that you're not going to get this version of Fred VanVleet last season that struggled. You're going to get the season before, the seasons before that, and what we've known him to be, not this bad year where he's clearly dealing with back stuff and playing like 38 minutes a night on a team that's not winning any games. You're expecting more. And yeah, I think people just really, really, really want to see that next step from Scottie Barnes. And it was clear that Fred VanVleet and his usage is in the way. And so that's I think where that sentiment comes from. But as someone who just wants to see the team win, I think giving up a player like Fred VanVleet for nothing is not great.
Yeah, and I mean, you made the point. If you didn't want to pay him, then this should have been something that was addressed like at the trade deadline. If you so you should have had a better pulse. So you lose Fred VanVleet, but you re-sign Jakob Poeltl. You get rid of Nick Nurse. You hire a first-time NBA head coach. Just, I know this is probably too existential, but like, what is this team's direction then? It seems like they're sending all these mixed messages. And on top of everything, by the way, like, OG is going to be a free agent as an extension eligible. Ditto for Pascal Siakam, both those guys have been like kind of in trade rumors. Siakam's trade rumor mill has been hotter than OG's this summer, I would say. Like, does this team not have an idea of what it is yet? Like, am I too far removed from the situation? Do they have a pulse and I don't see it? Like, what is their direction?
Yeah, I think all of last season and even heading into July 1st, I'm like, why is everyone asking this question? They've told us like every time you get them in front of a microphone, they're telling us, run it back. We like this team. We like this core. We think Scottie can take the next step and fit in with this team, right? And then you lose Fred VanVleet. And it's like, okay, what is your direction? Because you're walking into next season with Pascal, as you mentioned, and OG, as you mentioned, and Gary Trent Jr. as well, who, exercised his player option, is now going to be expiring. So you have 3 of your top 6 players once again expiring. What is your plan? You don't have a pick either. And I think if you gave them a little truth serum, here's what I think it is, and I've been thinking a lot about this. I think if you give them truth serum, they're gonna be like, but I think it really depends on the next step that Scottie takes. Okay. I think a lot of the answers to this question fall on Scottie Barnes, right? So if Scottie Barnes takes that next leap, and if we're talking about Scottie Barnes in his third year, Pascal Siakam was the second leading scorer on a championship team in his third year, after being a bench player the year before. Guys in their third year can take that leap, and I'm not saying that he needs to be that good right away, but if we're seeing a progression, if we're seeing that next leap from Scottie Barnes, then I think keep Pascal. Like, why wouldn't you do, like, if Scottie looks like he's ready to win now, then Pascal is ready to win now. We're not talking about them being on 2 separate timelines. You have guys that are ready to win. Now you bring in a bunch of shooting around them and you reconstruct this roster around your 2 guys. If Scottie takes that next step. Now, if Scottie doesn't, still early, year 3 doesn't mean that he's not going to take that next step eventually. But if he doesn't, then we're talking about, okay, well, can you make some moves to fit around Pascal Siakam? If not, do you have to move Pascal Siakam? And I think at that point, the conversation has to be, do you move Pascal? And that's where I maybe differ from a lot of Raptor fans, because in my thoughts is, if he doesn't take that next step, or if it doesn't look like that superstar progression is coming, or that all-star, all-NBA progression is coming, I wouldn't want to trade away my best player for someone if there's nobody better coming through the pipeline, if that makes sense, right? So that's where I have a little bit of my hangups, and I think Raptor fans are going to get mad at me for saying that, and I'm not saying that he can't take that next step. I'm just saying this season, last year when we talked about it, I thought, if Scottie's great, if Scottie takes that leap, cherry on top, sky's the limit for this team. Whereas this season, I don't think that that's the case. I think it matters. I think it's a core piece of what this team looks like. I think it's the core piece of what this team looks like and what direction they choose to take. Really comes down to, what does Scottie Barnes look like?
And there's that feels like it's a multi-layered question, but there's like a twofold to it. So looking at last season, where did he regress most? What was most disappointing? Was maybe the regression overblown from a national perspective? How much of that also had to do with the roster construction a little bit? Because I'm with you. I actually don't. There are redundancies to Scottie Barnes and Pascal Siakam. I want to make that clear. But if you surround Pascal Siakam and Scottie Barnes with shooting, that's a really good team. And the Raptors just didn't do that. So I find myself, I mentioned this to you before you come on, I'm trying to center my thoughts on how I feel about Scottie Barnes because they're so scattered and disorganized and chaotic. Because I don't know how much blame to ascribe to him versus like the roster construction really wasn't built, frankly, to optimize like most of their top talent. It was like a lot of Pascal Siakam played really well, almost in spite of how the roster was built around him.
Entirely that. And I agree with that 120 million%. I think with Scottie, where we saw a little bit of regression is with his efficiency. So coming into the league, there was a lot of talk about Scottie Barnes not being a shooter at all, like not having any sort of range on his shot. There were jokes about like 0-level score and all this other stuff. And right away, it was mean. And right away, he disproved that. First game, I think his first shot was like this like gorgeous sky hook. Like right away, we were like, hey, look at this guy. And you saw that being disproved right away. And that's why he won Rookie of the Year. He had a fantastic rookie season. And in his second year, not to say that he regressed into being, all those mean jokes early on, but we saw that efficiency dip across the board. And I think and this is sort of where the Jakob Poeltl conversation comes up, because we're talking about a lot of guys' redundancies, is where we really saw Scottie excel is when he played your sort of nominal 5.
Okay.
That's where you really saw, I think Scottie's best month last year would have been January. That's where you really got to see him excels when he plays that sort of 5 for the team. That obviously takes a toll on people's bodies, but you're sort of using him in that way. It's similar to, and Raptor fans are going to get in so much trouble for this, but it's similar to everyone talking about, is Ben Simmons a point guard? Ben Simmons offensively kind of fits as your 5, right? Because he doesn't have that sort of shot yet. And
I think it's very kind that you said yet. That was very nice of you.
When people were having those conversations about Ben Simmons, it might have been year 2, 3. We're down the line now. But I think with Scottie, there's no reason, he's 21, right? There's no reason to believe that he can't progress. There's no reason to believe that he can't grow. Pascal Siakam also did not have a shot at all at this age. So he doesn't have much right now, but still much better. It's still much better. So I think that would be sort of the main thing. And as a ball handler and as your primary playmaker, there's going to be a lot of steps that Scottie's going to need to take, especially if the ball is just going to be in his hands and he's going to be the guy doing it. He can make really flashy passes, right? Like those no-look passes are gorgeous. You're talking about a big guy playmaking. That's always going to be great. We all love big playmakers. It's fun to watch, and it's also just smarter if guys can just see over the defense. But I think with Scottie Barnes, it's going to be how to get into the teeth of the defense. Because another thing that we're missing with Fred VanVleet is, he's not a guy who can finish at all, right? He really struggles, but he's also, as a ball handler, the guy who got you the most paint touches. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be something, I think a lot easier to do as a smaller guy than as a bigger guy getting in there. But that's going to be something where we're going to need to see Scottie take that next step. Those are going to be the areas that I'm watching just as the primary playmakers or primary ball handler. Can he get this team paint touches? How is his kick-out game? Can he finish also consistently, get to the free throw line? Those are going to be the things that we want to see from Scottie Barnes, and those are things that I think he can do. So I'm excited about the next step, but where he sort of took a step back last year is because, again, the offense doesn't prioritize him when you have Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam doing their thing, but also you need him to be a spacer in some ways, and he just can't. So as a screener, sort of your nominal 5 on offense, he, dribble handoff action, I think we're going to see a much different offense, I think. And I think that's what this comes down to, is with Darko, we'll hopefully see a much different offense than we saw last year. But I, again, don't think that's an entire knock on Nick Nurse. I think that's more so roster construction.
Yeah, with Scottie, I actually believe he'll end up being an okay standstill shooter. I don't know. I don't think he'll ever probably become a pull-up threat. I believe in his ability to get to the basket. I think even when you watch him, sometimes it feels like he doesn't get to the basket as much as he actually does because he throws up that, that turnaround push shot or that hook shot a lot. Yeah. And maybe you'd like to not him bail out as much. And I think he'll get to the free throw line more often because of his ability to get inside like that. The thing is, and I think this overlaps with your concern, is just when you mentioned Jakob Poeltl, he's not going to be in Scottie Barnes most of these lineups the nominal 5. You're going to just have this 5. And so can that processing speed as a playmaker increase? Because when he has like a head of speed, and it doesn't have to be in transition, but like if he's like turning a corner in the half court and like he's catching the ball and going, he can be really devastating, both as a scorer and a passer. Yeah. But it's in those slower, more methodical situations where if you have to call for a ball screen from Jakob Poeltl, or if the defense is just back and it's forcing you to set, I don't know that I'm not saying he can't do it. I just don't know how confident I am that like the dynamic between Scottie and Jakob as Scottie, this driving force of your offense, is going to work with the current roster. You definitely feels like you need more shooting, but I think a lot of it is just going to come down to Scottie acting faster in slower situations. That might be a terrible way to phrase it, but like that's where I'm just the most curious.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I'm honestly really excited to see what this next. I'm excited to see what their fit is because they signed Jakob on for long term. This looks to be the team. I know there are reports about like, can you get a Bogdan from Atlanta to help with your spacing? Are there some other people that you can add? But I'm excited to see what this team looks like. I think this will be a big year for Scottie.
Pascal Siakam, I feel like, is viewed as this, and we might have had the exact same discussion last year, as this good, not great player. And it felt like that persisted last year. What do you think is like the misconception about how well he performed last season or how valuable he is? And then also just sort of, what does he need to do? Like he shot, like, is it simply just, hey, if you could hit more than 34% of your catch and shoot threes, like that would be great, buddy. Like we don't need you to be a pull-up threat. Like, could you just hit like 37% of your catch and shoots? Like what are you looking or monitoring most closely with him this year?
Yeah, this is where I get a little delulu. So okay, a couple of things. One is I think the overall perception of Pascal Siakam comes from the fact that, again, we talked about this, we've mentioned it already. He's doing this in a team that is not built to maximize his skill set in the slightest, right? There's a lot of conversations about this, in order for Scottie to develop and in order for Scottie to grow, you need more shooting. You need a team that's built around him, and that is true. But the same could be said for Pascal Siakam, and still Pascal Siakam continues to take that next leap. Pascal Siakam's ability to do this in negative spacing is something to behold. It is something that, I mean, maybe Shea for Team Canada, if I can just bring it back to that one more time, that I've seen. But like it is something, it is a sight to behold, his ability to create something out of nothing. But I think what it comes down to for Pascal, and we can look back at the numbers, the start of the year and the end of the year are very different. And I think a large part of that comes down to the usage that he has, but more importantly, the minutes that he plays. He has led the league in minutes the last 2 seasons. This is a guy who's dealt with the same injury over and over again. And we're starting to see that take a toll. You talk about his catch and shoot numbers. Pre-All-Star, he shot 37% in catch and shoot threes. Post-All-Star, 28%. So there is, and like that is not just like a one random trend from last season. That's kind of what happens. And that's probably going to continue to happen if he plays 40 minutes a night or whatever crazy thing it is. Hopefully now that you have Darko in instead of Nick Nurse and you have a more deep roster, this Raptors team has more playable guys than they had last season. That hopefully goes down. So I do think a large part of it is this load that he's had to carry for the team in playing and leading the league in minutes the last 2 seasons. You see that you see his numbers go down. You can go across the board. His efficiency continuously goes down post All-Star. I have to imagine that comes down to the load that he's had to carry.
Yeah,
I mean, 37% catch and shoot guy from 3 at the start of the season down to 28 and a half maybe in the second half of the season, not second half of the season, but from February onwards, really points to a guy who just has to carry this massive burden. But I think at the start of the season, we were talking about Pascal is like, whoa, this next step that he just took. Is he going to be on like, where is he going to fall on your all NBA list? It wasn't, is he going to make the team? It was, how high do we have him up here? Because he's just playing insane basketball. I think he had like a 40-point triple-double against the Brooklyn Nets. And it's like, this guy is unstoppable. There is actually nothing you can throw at him. And again, this is on a team that cannot shoot, which says a whole lot. It's not a team that is built to maximize his skill set. So what I would say to the rest of the world who doesn't understand what Pascal's doing is, one, the burden that he's carrying is the highest in the league. He's led the league in minutes the last 2 seasons, and that matters. And 2, he's on a team that is not built for him. It is built with copies of him, which does not really work very well. Right? So like being able to do that on a team that just is not there to maximize your skill set. Imagine if you had a Pascal Siakam around a bunch of shooting. I think you're talking about this team in a much different way. And if he doesn't have to carry the load defensively also, because of this aggressive style of defense that we talked about Nick Nurse deploying, I think we're talking about Pascal Siakam in a much different light. So I do think that he's had to carry a pretty heavy burden for this Raptors team.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think you can see it in a lot of just like some of their splits. Even look at Scottie last year was at like 49% shooting on drives before the
Yeah.
All-Star break. And he was at 37-8 afterward. That doesn't
Look,
happen like by another team's design. It's not like the league suddenly figured what
yeah.
Scottie's doing once he gets into
Figured
the lane.
Scottie out. Yeah.
Right. And look, I am in awe of I still think there's an element of like what I'm concerned with Scottie Barnes, where I want Pascal Siakam to be able to move quicker in these slower situations. But he is such like this lateral shiftiness with the ball
Yeah.
in his hands that Scottie doesn't yet have. And so it's like if you're not going to surround him with more spacing, you kind of need Scottie to take a half court ball handling trajectory from Pascal Siakam if you want him to even come close to maximizing. But I'm with you, and I find the talk of I think it's clear the Raptors have shown that they will let Pascal Siakam get to free agency just because we saw it with Fred, we saw it with Kyle Lowry. But what is
I'm too
more like
stressed for that. Masai, think about me.
right? And so yeah, think about him on Masai. Come on. What is more likely though? Is it more likely that he signs an extension or that he gets traded? I'm not saying those are the only two options, but what do you think is more likely?
I hate to say that this comes back down to what okay, I'm not gonna say that. And here's the craziest thing is if you asked me this last season about Fred VanVleet, Gary Trent Jr., and if I knew that Jakob was coming, I'd be like, they'll sign back. This is easy. It's done. And that didn't happen. I did not foresee again Ime Udoka taking over the Houston situation and loving Fred VanVleet as much as he apparently does. So I would still bank on Pascal coming back. You look around the league, how many teams really have cap space? Number one, every team is scared of the second apron. Number two, I actually don't know who has cap space. I should probably look at that so I can be worried some more.
There's
But
not any contenders if that's any
that's
consolation.
like I'm like, yeah, I was thinking that. I was thinking that it's like I think that there is a strong chance that he does resign with the Raptors. I will say this though, regardless of if he makes all NBA, I don't really believe the Raptors are giving him that supermax.
No, that's the oddest bit of reporting to me. I understand why he would want to be Supermax eligible because even just saying I'm Supermax eligible, even if you don't sign it, but this idea that he wouldn't re-sign with another team because he wants to be Supermax eligible, the Raptors have proven they are not going to pay that money. That
Yeah.
just by letting Fred walk, and so I don't. If he leaves, I don't think it factors into that. I just think it
No.
would be if they let him get to free agency. He's not happy there, or maybe they were really lowballing him. But I would be if
Yeah.
he's Supermax eligible and they gave him I would honestly probably faint from
Yeah,
shock.
I can see him being super. Here's where I'll say maybe if he's first team all NBA and it's like there was no one else that was going to take one of those forward spots from him. I love Pascal. Don't really foresee that happening this season. But that might be a scenario where it's like, all right, he's one of the two best forwards in basketball right now.
Especially without because the positions are gone now, right? From all
Oh yeah,
NBA. So
so
like,
it's
but
three
you would
best
think it's gonna be
bigs.
stocked with guards. Like, oh, it's gonna be Luka and
Oh,
Steph and like
there's
all.
no positions. I completely forgot that.
So if he makes first team all
Uh,
NBA, you might have to just
yeah,
because.
so here's the thing. If he makes first team all NBA, sorry, Stephen Curry. You're splitting those votes with Chris Paul, apparently. Oh, that'd be the best. Chris Paul just gets some all NBA votes. Okay. Yeah, so like that would be a scenario where I think they would pay him that. Outside of that, I don't think that they're gonna give him the supermax. But I still think he'll stay. I mean, Jakob is his best friend, right? They traded for Jakob. I think Pascal had a lot to do with that. They kept him. I think he stays.
Who's more important to that dynamic working? Like when you're looking at this, I'll call it the front court of like Scottie Barnes, Jakob Poeltl, and Pascal Siakam, because Poeltl, they all in theory want to occupy the same space, just in different ways. Is it Siakam because he's going to be the guy that's dotting up around like Scottie Barnes getting into the paint, or if there's a Jakob Poeltl, Scottie Barnes pick and roll, or is it Scottie Barnes because it's like, hey, you need a better facilitator here, someone who's going to make some better decisions maybe once he gets into the paint. And then you also need him. Like, yeah, he's going to be dotting the arc when Pascal Siakam. Like, who is more important to this sort of? And how does Jakob Poeltl sort of factor in here? Does
I
he
don't
get
know.
squeezed of like minutes in crunch time because they don't necessarily want to play with that many non-shooters on the court? And then we all know about how he is at the foul line. So like, what like that dynamic is just so like who's of the three? Who's it on the most to make it work?
That's a good question. I do think that they'll certainly go down. Jakob's minutes will go down. We saw that already. There was a huge game in February that Scottie Barnes won at the 5. Like, he played the 5 in that fourth quarter, and he absolutely won the team the game, and that was against Chicago Bulls in right after the trade deadline. And I think that's looking at that, I was like, okay, this is what, because those were questions that people had last season when they thought everybody was running it back as well. And you looked at that sort of game and were like, okay, this is your closing lineup. Against certain teams, it's going to be Scottie Barnes at the 5. It's not going to be Jakob in these situations, and I think that we're going to continue to see that. So I think his minutes will definitely get squeezed. Who do I think is? I think it's got to be Pascal Siakam.
Okay,
I do. I think it's got to be Pascal Siakam. I can see maybe it's Scottie. If Scottie, I think it's got to be Pascal Siakam. I'm going to say that it's got to come down to him, just because he is your best player, and he's got to be. He's also. I can see Pascal taking. I was going to say something, and then I just remembered it is a contract year, and the Supermax is available. Even if he does not get it, he's still going for it. So I'm going to delete what I was about to say, because it's not happening. He's not doing that sort of OG. Just going to stay back here. Yeah.
I'm just very curious, because like Fred VanVleet assisted on like 33% of Jakob's buckets last year after he came to Toronto. And so it's like that share is going to have to come from someone else. And I mean, Dennis Schroder, sure. But like it's like Scottie or Pascal's going to like have to ratchet up like the connection they have with him.
I like also, again, with Dennis, it's like, and like, I'm glad that they brought in a traditional point guard. But again, because of his lack of pull-up shooting, we even saw it with his success in Germany, which I think a lot of Raptor fans are hoping he can replicate here. That team is built very different than this Raptors team because of the shooting that they have, right? Like, it is a different sort of look. And when you have a guy who, like, are you going to run pick and roll with Dennis Schroder and Jakob Poeltl? I think if you look at the numbers last year with the Lakers, it worked in lineups where, again, there was shooting. Like, you need to have that. And I think I just don't understand how teams just don't go under every single time on anything the Raptors do. It's just going to the lack of shooting is going to be a real issue, especially if you start Dennis Schroder, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Scottie Barnes, and Jakob Poeltl. If that's your starting 5, we're going to see that be an issue immediately.
Sort of lost in all this. We haven't really talked about him that much. OG Anunoby, in a contract year. He's perfect, though. Has the ship sailed on ball OG Anunoby, though? Like, I really want to see it, but I feel like each year I like am a little bit lower on it over the past couple.
And that's fair. That's fair. I think we've seen him with some clips at Stephen Curry's camp.
I have not seen that. That is interesting.
He's at Stephen Curry's camp, and I think there have been some. I don't know. What do they do? Dribble the ball with 2 hands? Dribble 2 balls and 1 in each hand? We're seeing some dribbling workouts happening. I don't think it's over. I don't think it's over. And I think what this Raptors team always is, when you look at a team that has, we just keep repeating it. When you look at a team that has as many, I don't want to call them redundant players, because they're not. They do have separate skill sets. But when you look at teams that have similar size,
maybe, that might be,
okay. Redundancy of weaknesses, or just similarly sized guys. The whole idea, especially if OG is going to be your 2, is just attacking mismatches. That's going to be a ton of what the Raptors are going to be looking to do. And so I think we're going to see all ball reps from all 3 of the main guys that we're talking about here. I think we're going to see a lot of it. I don't think it's just going to be point Scottie, let him run, or point Pascal, you let him run. I think we're going to see a lot of guys really get into the mix of things. Even like we've seen some sort of dribble handoff action from a guy like Jakob Poeltl. He was sort of a hub for San Antonio when he was there as well. So I think that the offense that we're going to be getting is going to have a lot of different attacks, and I think a lot of that is going to fall on like, hey, OG, you want to have more reps? For as much as we're talking about Scottie wanting to have more reps, every single rumor for the last 2 years has been OG wanting to have more reps, wanting to have the ball in his hands, wanting to see what he can do. And I think OG can do it. And I think one thing, again, this is me looking back at the numbers from like last year and the year before, OG's like ISO numbers were terrible. to start the year, not last season, but the season before that. And that's because Pascal was gone. And that's because there was not a single shooter on the court alongside him for a good chunk of those minutes. And so I think he was like in the 11th percentile, if I if I remember that correctly. It was bad. And then the playoffs came around and he jumped up to like the 88th percentile or something like that. And it was like, oh, when you put shooters around OG and you give OG Anunoby the ball, he can actually create stuff. Can he create things for other people? That's going to be sort of the next step in his evolution and in his growth. But I think we're going to start to see more on-ball reps. The only thing that I'm worried about is, again, you're having no shooting, and maybe that's something that Pascal can make something out of nothing out of. But can OG and Scottie prove that they can do the same? That's the test.
It's so funny how we have to ascribe, and I'm legitimately saying this, the caveat of, but they have negative spacing to everything. Because I just look at OG, just like, he had a higher turnover rate than assist rate on his drives last year. I was like, no. But then it's like, well, he's working with negative spacing. So let's still hold out hope for it. It's just funny that we have to apply that caveat
when your own teammates are in your way.
But it's like, we're in year 3 of that caveat, and so it's like, why are we still doing this?
And they just gave up their best shooter, who was addition by subtraction. Oh god. Yeah, it's not great. It's not great.
So I have 2 questions about Gary Trent Jr. One that's like related to the bigger picture of the Raptors. But what happened? Like, he opts in, and then there was reports about an extension is coming, and we're recording this on September 19th. There's no Gary Trent Jr. extension, to the best of my knowledge. And I'm like, what's going on there?
I'm going to be honest, I was way more surprised about hearing that there was an extension that was coming. So it not happening, I was like, okay, makes sense, because I was surprised by that rumor. To me, I think what this summer showed us with Gary Trent Jr. is, I think he tested the market as he should. And there wasn't one out there for him in the way that I think he had wanted and maybe expected. At the start of last season, I think by December, when Nick Nurse was benching him and all this other stuff, I think if you would have told me, would he stay or would he go, I'd be like, he's out the door. Like, someone is giving him that money and he's out the door. But then the second half of the season happened. And what we saw is, yes, this team desperately needs shooting, so maybe the Raptors should hold on to him for dear life. But when all you can do is shoot, and that shooting goes away, as we saw in April, not to disparage or disrespect Gary Trent Jr., who I think had a really good year for the Raptors the season prior. He led, I think, the league in steals for a good chunk of the year. He took a step back defensively, and we're talking about on-ball reps for OG. We're talking about on-ball reps for Pascal, all of the forwards. Why are we not talking about the one guard that you have? Like, that's an issue when you're the one guard that you have. When we're talking about, you need someone who can run the offense for the second unit. Well, you have a 23-year-old guard here that you brought in, but that's not something that he can do. And I think what we're starting to see is like the limitations of a Gary Trent Jr. type player. I also think, the summers that Jordan Poole and Tyler Hero had maybe don't bode well for a player like that. And they all, better playmakers, better ball handlers, can do more things than a guy like Gary Trent Jr. can do. But I think we're starting to see the limitations of, when you can just shoot, what else can you do? And I think this is a really big year for Gary to prove that. Again, he's young. Again, there's no reason to not believe that he can improve and do all these other things. But how he fits, if he's the one who is tasked to man the second unit, can we put the ball in your hands and trust that something will come out? I also think that, I was going through the numbers. I wish I had them memorized right now, but his numbers when he's playing alongside a guy like Pascal Siakam versus not, we're talking about Pascal really needing the shooting, but boy, oh boy, does Gary Trent Jr. look like a much better player when Pascal Siakam is on the court versus not there. Which Pascal, just perfect. And if you can keep him, Raptors, do it, regardless of the cost. But yeah, so I think with Gary Trent Jr., there's a lot of questions. It's more so, what can you do? And I think until he proves that, not just to other teams, but to the Raptors as well, I'd be surprised to see an extension come out unless it is a very team-friendly deal. And if I'm Gary Trent Jr., I'd rather prove it. I'd rather bet on myself than sign a super team-friendly deal because you just had a really bad second half of the season.
And he's still young enough to improve.
Yeah.
And still looking at his weaknesses. And so, like you mentioned, the passing, and just like, I looked this up in preparation of the podcast. It was 142 players finished at least 200 drives last year. Gary Trent Jr. had the 4th lowest assist rate among those players. And part of that, again, could be the negative spacing. We have to throw that caveat in there.
How many of those were in transition and there was someone running alongside him? I don't know.
But like, given that, and then also how much you need his shooting, his off the dribble 3-point clip fell off last year, but at least you know he's a guy that could do that a little bit.
For sure.
Does it actually make sense? And knowing you want to put the ball in Scottie's hands and you want it in Pascal's hands, is there a merit to, hey, why don't we start Gary Trent Jr. and we'll bring Dennis Schroder off the bench to run some of the second unit stuff? Or is that not something you think the Raptors are going to end up considering?
Honestly, I think initially that's what I thought it would be for that exact reason. I think Gary Trent Jr. matters so much to what this team looks like. I wasn't trying to disparage him. I actually think that he is important to what this team looks like because of that pull-up shooting. Because
of their best shooter, right? Maybe Gradey Dick you throw in there.
He's the best. I mean, Gradey Dick hasn't played a single second of NBA basketball, so I'll give it to Gary. Gradey and Gary. Wow, I didn't realize how similar that sounded. But no, I think it's definitely got to be Gary Trent Jr. I initially thought that he was going to start for that reason, and you were just going to run with point Scottie, point Siakam when you can, figure things out that way. But hearing that Dennis Schroder came to the Raptors specifically because of Darko Rajokovic and Dennis Schroder expects to start, I was like, oh, maybe some things have been talked about there. Maybe it makes more sense to have, an actual point guard like that you can trust. Raptor fans, Scottie Barnes can be that person, but maybe right from the jump, game one. So yeah, it wouldn't surprise me either way. I think that that's the biggest debate that's happening right now. And Gary Trent Jr. definitely for his spacing makes more sense with the starting lineup. He also I think he fits more seamlessly with the starting lineup. But yeah, I honestly, I think to start out, I probably would start Gary. If the bet is that Scottie can be that person for you, I would start Gary and have Dennis coming off the bench. But hearing Dennis say that, it seems like maybe he believes that maybe it's a Chris Paul situation that we're having here in Toronto as well. Bring it full circle. Dennis Schroder, our Chris Paul. Oh God.
I want to be very careful. When I was doing the outline, I may know this because I caught shit for the way I phrased it on draft night, as you can imagine. What did you think of the Gradey Dick selection, and how much of a role do you expect him to play in year one for this team?
I liked it because this team desperately needs shooting, and I liked it because yes, he's 6'8", so you're like, oh yeah, the Raptors took another 6'8" guy, but kind of the opposite of everybody else the Raptors have picked. Like we talk about it. It's like, oh yeah, the Raptors are going to draft somebody. Oh, another forward who's 6'8" and 7-foot long wingspan, can defend, can't shoot still. And like, finally they got a guy who can shoot. That is his skill set. It also, like, he's a little slow-footed. He's not, the type of player that the Raptors generally take. But he changed the vibes immediately in Toronto. So for a team that really was struggling until Team Canada came and saved us this summer with the bronze, baby, which we sell it. Like that meme where the guy's like pouring champagne all over himself and then it pans out. And it's like he won bronze, not even gold. That was us. Yeah, so I think that...
To be fair, that's a big deal. As you mentioned, Canada hasn't been to the Olympics since 2000, which I didn't even realize.
This is
absolutely pop champagne in that situation.
This is the first medal, I think. Yeah, this is definitely the first medal Team Canada's ever gotten in FIBA basketball. Not sure if they won one in Olympic basketball. If it happened in like 1936 or something. So this is a good moment to celebrate. Yeah. But anyways, besides the Olympic team, I think that Gary should start. That was my initial guess. But hearing Dennis Schroder's comments, I kind of believe that maybe that's not how the Raptors will go to start the season.
And so you don't anticipate them like leaning too heavily then on like Gradey Dick just because of like year one stuff, not as a starter, obviously, but just, hey, we need shooting. By the way, you mentioned not really a Raptors pick. If Jett Howard was on the board just because of like the wingspan differential, they absolutely would have just went with Jett. If it was between Gradey Dick and Jett Howard, that would have been the Raptors pick. But
Bilal Coulibaly, that's who I had all of my hopes on in Washington. That was the most Raptors pick imaginable.
Because they're laying the groundwork for Victor Wembanyama's recruitment in like 2030, whenever he hits free agency for the first time, whatever that would be at this point.
I got to deal with Giannis and Dame first. And B, I'm kind of reluctant, but I'm going to hop on the bandwagon if we miss out. And then Victor, we're coming for you.
So this is like when looking at all these ancillary players, well, actually, I have to ask, this isn't necessarily an accessory player. Where are you at on Precious Achiuwa right now after last season, which we know injuries sort of like made it stop and start for him, but just where are you at? We were both so unfathomably high on him last year. Where are you this year?
I love him. I think he's perfect. And sometimes there are growing pains. I know. So here's the thing. I think with Precious Achiuwa, he definitely took a step back last season, and injuries definitely played a part. He also, I think this is sort of the issue with Precious. Even the year before, is for a guy who can do so much, he tries to do too much, and finding that spot and finding your role. And again, it's going to be very difficult for him to do on a team with zero spacing because he comes in and is like, "I'm that guy." You know, like, and I want him to be, I did a very bad Photoshop of Max Kellerman saying he wants to take Iguodala to take that 3-point shot if the world is about, I don't know if aliens are going to, that meme where he's like, if
Yeah.
aliens are coming over. I put Achiuwa in there because that's who I want to take that shot. But that's also who Precious wants to take that shot. And sometimes Precious wants to take that shot with 20 seconds left on the shot clock. And there being absolutely no reason to do so. And that's a little bit of an issue. But no, in all seriousness, I think with Precious, he's young. We know what he is defensively. We know what he can be. But I think this team, I think his issue is that this team doesn't fit him more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
And there's got to be someone that falls out. And I think that has to be a guy like Precious. And I hate saying that because he's also still just my favorite player. But we're starting to see what the sort of cracks are when you have a team where what you need from your bench players, what you need from your role players, what you need from all those other guys is not more of the same of what you're getting from your starters. And again, it's not that it's redundant, but the weaknesses are redundant. And I think that's a little bit of an issue. And I can't believe I'm saying that. I did not expect to be talking negatively about Precious Achiuwa, but yeah, I think if this team needs to find a direction, it's like, but maybe the direction is they're moving off of Pascal Siakam, and there is a role for a guy like Precious Achiuwa coming off the bench. But if you have just too many of guys who just can't shoot, it becomes a major issue.
It would be pretty surprising if he got an extension, right? Precious Achiuwa.
Yeah, I think off the year that he just had, I would be very surprised.
Everybody's healthy. Who plays a bigger role among these three, or who's more important to this team? Jalen McDaniels, Otto Porter Jr., or Chris Boucher?
Otto Porter Jr. Oh my God. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if they had Otto Porter Jr. last year?
I mean, a rumor has it they did. We just didn't see it, but I think he.
Can you imagine if they had Otto Porter Jr. and not Nick Nurse last year? Let me rephrase my question.
He's like, they're gonna need him to play. So there's Gary Trent Jr. and let's have some confidence in Gradey Dick, who I think is a really good shooter and underrated team defender. Is like Otto Porter Jr. their third best shooter?
Yep.
Like,
who else? I don't think we're even like OG, but even with OG, and I think OG has improved. We saw that last season as well, but a lot of OG's looks come from the corner. And for a guy who can just space the floor in Otto Porter Jr., I think you sort of need that. Can you consistently get above the break looks from a guy like OG Anunoby? Can you consistently get looks from on the wings, or does he have to be deep in the corner in order to hit whatever mark? I think just in terms of floor spacing, it just matters so much more to be able to do that across the board. And I think that's something that Otto can do that I'd like to see more consistently from OG before I say that. Because, yeah, he's slotted in the corner. That's the role that he had to play. So that's not a knock on him. That's where the Raptors sort of forced him to be. But that's where he's hit his deadliest marks. But, yeah, I'd put him there for now just because he's going to be playing more and is going to be taking way more of those shots. But, yeah, it's a steep drop off after that.
I really like Jalen McDaniels. I hate him on this team. Is like where, and that's why. So like Otto Porter looks, because Jalen McDaniels can guard like up and down a little bit more. I think Otto Porter Jr. has gotten a lot slower, but just McDaniels is such a, at best, like sub below average shooter. And like the Raptors just need someone who can put up like 5-6 attempts per 36 minutes and hit them at an above average clip. I think that's Otto Porter Jr. I just question, like,
Yeah.
what can he guard defensively now at this point in his career? Because you might be in a situation where it's like, oh, look, another big. It's not really a wing. Chris Boucher is my siren song, just full stop.
Fair.
He's someone I feel like could be sneaky important if the 3-pointer starts falling again, just to be like, hey, we can build lineups off the bench where it's like we're staggering Scottie and Pascal, or even if it's Dennis or whatever, and we have 3 shooters on the court somehow. Like it's Gary Trent Jr. and Chris Boucher and Otto Porter Jr. and like it's working. Or so I think he could be sneaky important, but I agree with you that I think it's Otto Porter Jr. just because of when he's healthy, he feels like the most known or predictable quantity of the 3 on offense.
Oh, definitely. Because like I think the sort of spectrum that a guy like Chris Boucher is operating off of offensively is night and day. If that 3-point shot is there, then I would definitely have it be Chris Boucher. But also like, is Chris Boucher here for the long haul? Like, is that a player that gets moved? I sort of look at Precious and Chris Boucher, and I'm like, if the Raptors are looking to make some moves and to improve, are they, 2 names that get tossed into as additional salary and something, or I don't know, something there. Like I wonder with Chris Boucher, I think he might even be expiring soon. So that's sort of the big question to me, at least in terms of looking at this team long term. But I love Chris Boucher.
So do I. He's pure anarchy though, in both great and terrible ways. But
it's fun when you're winning.
The Chris Boucher experience is excellent when you're winning and/or Chris Boucher is playing great.
And it's also like, hey, it's fun if you're relying on a Chris Boucher or Precious Achiuwa. It's a lot when you got both of them that you got to rely on because of the swing, especially there offensively for both of them, and their belief in their 3-point shot. Let's put it that way. What you need, hey, take it. You need the team to take it. So keep defenses honest.
Is there, when you look at this personnel, are they built? Like, what is the pathway really just they need to hit more threes for them to improve upon the half-court offense, which was basically bottom 5 last year? It was even worse after they were like inbounding the ball after a made shot. Is it just, we've talked about shooting and negative spacing. Does it really just come down to that, or is there any other swing factors on this roster that could help measurably improve that standing?
Yeah, certainly ball movement and off-ball cutting. This was a team that stood around quite a bit last year. We saw a lot of your turn, my turn, which is I think a big reason why people are happy that Fred VanVleet is gone. Again, I don't want to fault him too much for that. I think that is comes down to coaching. But you saw a lot of your turn, my turn, and you're having Darko come in and saying that he's going to revamp a lot of that. So yes, spacing does help if you are going to be moving the ball a ton. It helps if guys are, if you have legitimate spacing there. But I think we didn't see a whole lot of off-ball cuts. That's something that Chris Boucher and Precious Achiuwa can both do really, really well, actually. Like, I think that if you're looking for an offense, it doesn't just have, okay, balls in Pascal's hands, balls in Fred's hands, go do something, everybody stand around and watch. And actually uses the athleticism and the speed of guys like Precious Achiuwa and Chris Boucher, they can actually be really important to what this team looks like. I take back everything that I say, because I think that Precious can be one of like just his cutting can be phenomenal when he does it and makes those right reads. Ball movement is going to be really, really important. Just getting other people involved a lot more, something that I think is what this team's going to come to. But like when it comes down to like, can they have an elite, or not even elite, but above average half court offense? I don't see it. I don't see it because I think you need pull-up shooting. I think teams just need it. It's not just catch and shoot guys. It's not just like the lack of 3-point shooters is one thing, but the lack of a pull-up threat, a single one, is another thing. Like, I think that matters. I think that matters in terms of team building. And so I don't expect that they will be a top 15 offense, but I think it's very likely that they are a top 10 and maybe even higher defense. And you're, again, getting looks in transition, which is kind of what this Raptors team has built their bread and butter on. Outside of Kawhi Leonard, when was the last time that this Raptors team was a good half-court offense? It's been a long time, even when they had Fred VanVleet and Kyle Lowry, right? Mm-hmm. Like, even when they had both of those guys, they were still a bad half-court offense team. They just got a lot of stops and ran out. And that's kind of what this Raptors team is built to do.
Are you ready for the cookie cutter portion of
Let's
the
go.
podcast?
Yeah.
Are there any strengths or weaknesses, concerns about this team that you have that you'll be monitoring entering this season that we have not talked about yet?
So I can't say shooting. Okay.
Well, you have to preface anything you say with the fact that they have negative spacing, because that is
Negative spacing. Can you? Yeah. So some things that I am worried about.
Or even if that you're saying what's good about this team that we're not talking of, like anything that we just haven't hit yet.
I'm gonna be honest. I was really high on this team last year, and had they brought Fred VanVleet back, I would be really high on this team this year. I can't say I struggle. Here's what I'll say. A large part of this season, as I mentioned, comes down to what their young guys look like. And I think people are discrediting and discounting how good those guys can be. And I think people are really discrediting how good Pascal Siakam can be if he's not playing 40 minutes a night and not dealing with a groin injury that he gets early on. So I think that there's a lot of talent on this team. OG Anunoby is still incredibly talented. And I think people are just really discounting the amount of talent that's still left on the Raptors team just because they haven't been able to make it work. Doesn't mean it can't work. And this is still a really talented roster.
I think what's interesting about you mentioning that is, I don't know if they all complement one another, but if you just get better health from Precious Achiuwa, Otto Porter Jr., I think you could say
And
there are
Pascal.
8, and Pascal too, but he at least played still last year, like a bunch. Like you have 8 or 9 guys on this roster that you could say they belong in an NBA rotation. I don't know that we've been able to say that for the past 2 years.
No, this is the deepest Raptors team since before Tampa.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
This is the deepest Raptors team since before Tampa. Yeah.
That's a great point. So to that end, what does the 10-man rotation look like? I did jot it down. It feels like there are 7 locks, although you're making me think there might only be 6 with what you said about Precious, but it's like
no, I think Precious is still. I would put Precious in. I changed my mind once I realized Precious is my favorite cutter on this team. I forgot that I love Precious Achiuwa. It just took a minute.
So I would say they have 7 locks then in Schroder, Barnes, Anunoby, Siakam, Poeltl, Gary Trent Jr., and Precious Achiuwa. How do you see it kind of like fleshing out after that? Because they have, again, more options there than they normally would have after the 6th and 7th guy.
Yeah, like so beyond that top 7, who do I think makes? So who did you just mention?
There's Chris Boucher. So we have Precious, Gary Trent Jr., Dennis Schroder, Scottie Barnes, Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, Jakob, Poeltl.
I think Gradey Dick definitely slots in some. I think you have Gradey Dick. I think Otto Porter is necessary. This team needs shooting. You have a shooter on the roster. Yes, defense will be a problem, but this team could really use a guy like Otto Porter. So I'd have him in there, and then Chris Boucher and Precious. We mentioned Precious. Chris Boucher matters to this team. He's a veteran presence on this team. He's been with them through a lot, and he does the dirty work. You can play him at the 5 as well, and this team needs a backup center. Christian Koloko, also speaking of a backup center, was really good for the Raptors last year when we're looking at he's so big. He's so big. And I think one of the drawbacks of a guy like Christian Koloko is he got really hit with that rookie whistle. And you're hoping that can be improved on, and you're also not needing to rely on him as much because you have Jakob Poeltl already. But I think Christian Koloko has to play and has to be a part of this roster because we saw like the numbers with him at the 5 versus him not there. Like the best Raptors lineup last year was Christian Koloko at the 5 along with the 4 other starters. That was the best lineup, and I think it was that for a reason. So I think this team goes 10 deep, and I think we're going to see all guys get involved. Thaddeus Young, I don't have him in there, but Jalen McDaniels I didn't mention. I don't think he was a part of that, and I think Jalen McDaniels gets minutes here as well.
Are they still a team that you could see? And I think they were one of the teams that did this more than other teams. Like they will really pander to like the matchups that they're facing on that particular night with how they're running their rotations.
Yeah, I think you have to when you have the limitations that this team does. I think that's sort of that's where you have to win games. I think that's just by design. That's what this team is going to do, unless they can exact their sort of sheer force and will on teams, which they might be able to do. But I think you have to play your matchups.
With that in mind, knowing they'll play their matchups, what do you think though will end up being their best or most relied upon crunch time unit? Is it just what we think the starting 5 is? Do we even really know what the starting 5 is going to be? So can it be that?
Yeah, it's I don't know that there's a definitive starting five. I think that that's sort of the debate that's out there, and I think after training camp we'll get a better understanding of what that is. I would imagine that their best five has to include Scottie, OG, Pascal. From there, I think
Trent has to be there, right?
I think yeah, for shooting. I think I was gonna say I think Dennis and Trent. I think we're going to see a lot of closing lineups that don't have a center in them. I at least wouldn't be surprised by that. Maybe I'm wrong to think that, but we saw it last year. We saw it just be incredibly successful against teams, and yeah, I would imagine that you're going to get a lot of closing lineups that don't have a Jakob Poeltl in there, but I'd imagine he'd start every game or most games.
Is there a quirky, weirdo, unconventional lineup that you would like to see them try this season?
Listen, so Vision 6'9" is not dead. Vision 6'9" is on life support, but I think the entire thing about Vision 6'9", which is all of your 6'9" guys playing at one time, the idea behind it was this is a crazy matchup. You throw it out there, and oh my goodness, teams' heads are going to break. What do you mean their one has to guard OG Anunoby? What do you mean their two is going up against Pascal Siakam? Like, what is this lineup? It makes absolutely no sense. And you get to press your advantages a ton. The issue was they were like, this isn't going to be your wacky lineup we throw out. This is going to be the whole team. And that's an issue, right? Like the idea of like, oh, versatility, and you're gonna have a bunch of guys go out there that can guard 1 through 5. Everybody can guard 1 through 5. We're such a versatile team. That's not what versatility should mean. Like there's a level of like malleability to what we're talking about, which is we can play big, we can play small, we can play a whole bunch of 6'9" guys, and that's not something that the Raptors could do last year. They had one look that they can throw out at you, and that was it. And we saw that there were major drawbacks to that. But that doesn't mean that Vision 6'9" isn't a fun lineup to throw out there and a good lineup to throw out there. It's when that's your only lineup, there becomes major problems. So I still think the wackiest lineup is the one that maybe Raptor fans hate right now, and they probably hate because like it's like getting too much of a good thing. It like becomes gross after a while. You're like, I don't want candy, I want actual dinner. And now that you have real dinner without shooting, maybe you can have some candy on the side, which is Vision 6'9".
It's weird because they're not built to have weirdo lineups, because I think you can justify any lineup combination they roll out there based off the construction of this roster. I would just like to see, like, what would it look like with Scottie Barnes and just our 4 best shooters? And so that would be Trent, OG, Gradey Dick, and then probably Otto Porter Jr. Like, would be like plus Scottie Barnes. Like, can we just see that? Like, can we just see what that lineup looks like?
I think I think that the Raptors should definitely throw a lot of that. I think definitely. I think that Scottie was shooters, Pascal was shooters. Those are definitely things that we should see for sure. I wonder about that one though. Can we get different? Like, who is it?
You could have Chris
Gary.
Boucher in there instead of like Otto Porter if you're like, but just I'm just like, give me this.
You mentioned Otto. I was like, oh, defensively that will be a interesting lineup to throw out there, especially because like you want to get out there and just like run with a team like that.
It has no shot blocking really whatsoever, that lineup.
No.
So I just want to see. It could be Pascal, it could be
protection.
Scottie, but give me the 4 best shooters on the team.
I would love that. I think that would be a lot of fun. Also, like get Pascal and Scottie in there with 3 other shooters often. Let's see what that looks like, which again ends up just being Pascal, OG, and Scottie. So we're not doing anything. We're not doing anything interesting with a lineup like that.
It's like that's what's the problem with this team. It's just like they're not really built to, like, Vision 6'9" is almost like made them too sensible when you're looking at the lineup combination.
Yeah,
maybe not
like,
but it's like, oh no,
crazy.
They have to do this. They have to do that and that and that. So
yeah, it's like someone has been walking on their hands their whole life, and then you finally see them walk with their feet, but they're walking backwards, and you're like, yeah, it's close enough. You know, like they got the direction right at least. But I think with like even the idea of just Scottie and a bunch of shooters, which I like. I like that idea. How long are you running with a guy like just I worry about what that sort of looks like when it's like, all right, so Otto's in there and you don't have a guy like Jakob or a guy like Pascal in there. The defense is not going to be all that great. There's just a lot of issues. Get better shooters. Get more shooters. Please, let's start a GoFundMe or bring Damian Lillard. That's the train that I'm on right now. I'm so sorry, Miami, because that would be perfect. That would be so perfect.
I remember you wrote, I think it was you that wrote about this. It was like very earlier in the offseason, I feel like, the
Yeah,
Damian Lillard
the
stuff.
Dame piece, yeah.
I am on board where you mentioned in there, you didn't phrase like this, but like team not, and there's only one team on there, but team come out of the woodwork and acquire Damian Lillard. I got in trouble with OKC Thunder fans by saying they should trade for him, pair him with
They
Shea.
should, though.
I would love him.
They should, though. Oh my gosh.
I would love him in Toronto. I would love him in New Orleans.
Or
I'm just like,
Orlando. He would be so good in Orlando. Like, can you imagine?
Magic fans were mad when I suggested
I
that.
know, because like you guys, and I love that you guys are mad because I want to have him. So if my only competition is Miami, I think we still will lose, but like I can feel a little bit more hopeful than like, oh, they have an offer that can trump ours.
There would also just be something so, it would be like a poetic justice of sending Damian Lillard to the other Florida team. Where it's
my God, that would be so funny. That would be so funny. It'd be so funny.
I'm with you, please.
Send him to Canada. Send him to Canada. Like, that's what I think the Raptors should just rebrand themselves as like, oh, your superstar wants out. Let's send him to Narnia or the closest thing, which is Canada, and then just like banish them. Like, let us be the team that you banish your stars to because they're misbehaving on your team. Kawhi, it worked. Dame, let's let it happen. Giannis, come through. I think that that's what the Raptors should rebrand themselves as.
That would be hysterical. This team is fascinating in the sense that because of everything you were just talking about, it feels like the early portion of the season could very much dictate like like the first 20 games. If they're playing really well, do they become a team that really then does go on the trade market to look for shooting? Or if they're playing really poorly, is it, well, maybe we start looking at Pascal trades again or OG trades? Or is it, oh, we're playing poorly, we need to double down and acquire, like they did with Jakob, like we're going to try and acquire shooting. Do you agree that like they're fascinating in that sense where it feels like they have a bunch of different like mid-season swing points that could sort of just based off the first 20 games or so could kind of determine how they're acting from there transactionally?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, last season at around December, I'm like, okay, I've seen enough. You need to get Jakob. And I was like, Kem Birch and this pick for Jakob. Now, Masai, who's much smarter than me and gets paid the big bucks, was like, not this pick, because that's going to be a lottery pick. Let's do next year's pick. And it happened. And I was like, finally. And everyone was like, what are they doing? What direction are they taking? And I'm like, no, guys, you don't understand. This is the issue. This is what they're missing. They need it. And it worked. And my logic and my reasoning behind that was when you had DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry, what the Raptors did was they brought in a bunch of different guys year in and year out to try to mask the deficiencies of a guy like DeMar DeRozan, for example, right? Like he can't guard and he can't shoot. Okay, let's bring in a 3-and-D wing in Damari Carroll. Let's bring in PJ Tucker, who can space the floor at the 4. Let's bring in Serge Ibaka, who can space the floor at the 4. It was year in and year out just trying to mask the deficiencies to try and build the best roster that you had. Now, they didn't have multiple years to do that with this core. They had one trade deadline. And the deficiency that they had was at the 5. We saw that. That was the biggest issue. And so to me, it was like, okay, if you want to bet on this team, if you want to bet on Fred VanVleet, Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, Scottie Barnes, Gary Trent Jr., the whole lot, if you want to bet on them, put them in a position to actually win. And to do that, I think you needed shooting and you needed a floor spacer. They didn't get the shooting, but they got not the floor spacer. They got the rim protector. And so to me, it was like, this is the deal that you have to make to try and see what this team looks like. And we saw it. And by the numbers, the starting lineup was really good. I think they were a top 5 net rating after Jakob came in. Their bench was just, I think, far and away the worst in the league. By the numbers there, you could look it up, but I'm pretty sure the bench was dead last and the starters were top 5 in net rating. And so it's like, you saw what they could be in order to buy into this team. And I think for this season, how it changes is, yes, you need to see what this team looks like before you decide again if Pascal is going to be your guy moving forward, if OG, like what that sort of looks like. Can you build around an OG and a Scottie timeline? Do the pieces make sense together? I think you need to sort of work that out. As I mentioned, I think the start of the season is really looking at what Scottie Barnes looks like and what that next step for him is. Is he a win now player? Because then in that case, why are you trading Pascal Siakam? You might as well keep them or not. But because both OG and Pascal are potential expirings, you have to make that decision pretty quickly. I don't think you can wait as long as the Raptors did last season by waiting all the way until the deadline. And then Fred VanVleet is gone. I think the decision has to come a little bit sooner. So I think the early part of the season matters way more now because they just saw what happened last season. But I still think, again, you got to make moves to see what this team looks like. And if they can't be maximized and it doesn't work like it didn't with DeMar after years and years and years, then okay, it's time to trade that player.
As we record this on September 19th, their win total is set at 36.5, which is 10 wins fewer than last year. I haven't looked, but aside from the Wizards, that has to be the biggest drop in win projections, would be my guess. Are you taking the over or the under on that?
Yeah, I think that over and under was really set because no one knows if they're going to make a midseason trade, right? So we could be talking about a team that doesn't have a Pascal Siakam on it because, I don't know, they traded him for Kobe Buffkin and Bogdan Bogdanovic. So I think it really just depends on, do I think this team will stay together? Because I think if they stay together, they should be over 36 wins. And I'm going to say, yeah, I think that Pascal Siakam is a Raptor by the end of the season.
I would probably, we haven't done our over-under, so I don't want to reveal, but I will say I agree with you just because I think it's more likely that, and so much can happen. I think it's more likely that they triple down on the trade market again than they become these just sellers, because they can't make, I would just be flabbergasted if they make the same mistake with Fred VanVleet that they did with Siakam. Like, if they, with both Siakam and Anunoby. I'm not saying they'll both have extensions because I don't think OG is going to sign an extension, but
no,
I think they're going to
make sense for him too.
I just don't think they're going to be traded, at least. And so I think that's why that total seems a little bit lower. And I also would expect that because of the nature of keeping them, you almost have to make a move on the trade market because you don't want to like let this season go to waste when stuff could happen. And
you don't have a pick.
Yeah, that's a great point. But hey, you could be like the 5th worst team in basketball and keep
that is true. That is true. But please don't have a pick this season.
And I will say, and I'm not sure if this, a team like the Pacers and like other teams where the East is so wide open, does it benefit or hurt the Raptors there? Because I think if you're being like, let's be real, there's the Cavs. I don't love Boston after their Porzingis trade, but there's Boston and there's Milwaukee, I think, are the 3 teams that you could say, okay, they're better than everyone else. And then I don't know what's going on in Philly with Harden. Dame's not in Miami just yet. And so even if you want to throw, okay, Dame's going to go to Miami, we'll throw them there. Like, that's 4 teams that you could say are better than that kind of morass of teams below them, where it's okay. I could see the Knicks being 5th, but I could see the Raptors, or I could see the Pacers. I could see the Hawks being there. Does that help or hurt the Raptors? Do you think that relative wide openness in the, let's call it the middle, the meat and potatoes of the East?
I think it has historically helped because we saw this a decade ago when you have this sort of Heatles dismantling and the Pacers traded Granger, and for some reason that team just kapoof after that. But so I think we saw Masai be like, okay, yeah, the East is wide open. Even though we have this very middling team, let's double down on this. And that's what they did, right? So because the East was wide open and it wasn't a particularly good team, they just happened to trade away Rudy Gay and suddenly they decided to start winning basketball games. So I think we've seen Masai sort of take that approach in a wide open East before, and it made the Raptors the winningest team in the Eastern Conference in the decade. Mainly because the East was wide open when they decided to take that step. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's a thing that's done now, except the difference would be they have a Scottie Barnes who's like a 21-year-old that they can build around versus, or 22-year-old, I don't know how old he is, versus at that time, DeMar was a little bit older. Kyle had just came in and he was, in his late 20s. So it's a little bit different, but to me, it's just like what we've seen Masai Ujiri do in the past is that, I mean, even when he was in Denver, it was like, nope, we're not going to tank. We're going to trade away our superstar to get pieces back and continue to win. And they won, 57 games that year after trading Carmelo. So what we've seen from Masai Ujiri is a reluctancy to go towards the bottom and build up from the middle. And if he sees a wide open path, and he's like, why can't our team be at the top of that? Which is exactly what happened to Denver when he was there and what happened to the Raptors. So I don't know, his track record says the last 2 times he's been in this situation, he went on to win because he thought, hey, it's open. Why not? But I don't know.
That's a great point. After 80 minutes is there anything that we haven't
I haven't
asked you about that we haven't covered you think needs to be touched upon?
Yeah, no. I mean, the Raptors need shooting. Isn't that what this comes down to?
Oh, we didn't mention that.
I can't believe we've gotten this long without talking about the lack of, a pull-up threat on the team, catch and shoot guys. But in all seriousness, I think Pascal can really take that next step. I think Scottie can take that next step, even in terms of their shooting. And maybe you get some more of that from OG. Maybe Steph is teaching OG the secrets to being the deadliest pull-up shooter in basketball.
Going up from just off a half court.
Oh my gosh, can you imagine the first possession and just like, wait, what?
Contract year OG's on some stuff, huh? Like, Aman, are you able to tell our listeners where they can find you and all the great work that you do?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter as long as it exists. At Iman_Adden. Also, please do check out Pros and Claws. It's a Substack, and I'm hoping to have that Chris Paul Golden State Warriors piece coming out soon, and we'll be talking a lot of Raptors on there as well. And then, of course, I'm with Yahoo Sports Canada. You're going to see a lot of video essays this year, a weekly pod, but yeah, a lot of and some shorts too, because the kids, their attention spans not 80 minutes long.
Look, we have built a YouTube and TikTok following based off stuff that has nothing to do with the podcast we are actually recording. They're just me and my co-host like yelling two-word answers at each other because that's the content that gets shared and that's the content people like. I'm here for the
algorithm is king. Hey.
Aman, thank you so much for coming on. It always means a lot when we can get veteran guests. They keep agreeing to come back, and you are one of them at this point. So I very much appreciate it. Your time, your insight.
I'm
sure, as you know by now, I'll be pestering you again in the future. So thanks so much.
Hopefully it's better things to talk about that time. Maybe we just reverse jinx it. Last year we were way too high on them. This year they suck. They're bad. Crap.
The next time we talk, we'll probably be talking about their excess of shooting. They have too much. They have to cut it down.
The team has too much shooting.